Mom told me I had to go. Can we please just stay for the night? My 9-year-old grandson stood at the door, looking frazzled and vulnerable. It was late, and as I hurried to answer, I noticed he was barefoot, blood trickling from his toes. Clinging to him was his 4-year-old sister, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Did you two really walk here all by yourselves?" They nodded solemnly, and I quickly opened the door to let them in. But my husband, George, woke up in a fury, and the sight of our grandkids' tear-streaked faces only intensified his anger. I couldn't believe he wouldn't let them stay just one night. I'm Eleanor, a 63-year-old housewife living with my 62-year-old husband, George, a retired high school teacher. Our children are grown, Simon lives nearby, and Claire has her own apartment. Our daughter-in-law, Victoria, is stunning, with porcelain skin and striking eyes that could captivate anyone, provided she kept her mouth shut. She's the quintessential daughter-in-law, yet her sharp tongue often left me seething. "Why would someone like me marry a man like him?" she often quipped. "Are you saying Simon isn't good enough? He has a solid job and works for a reputable company. Sure, he may not be the most handsome, but he's decent," I countered. "Honestly, I'm not picky, so I guess he's lucky," she retorted, her insults cutting deep. I felt a surge of anger but held my tongue to avoid conflict. George, however, couldn't stay quiet. "Simon sure outdid himself with his wife, didn't he?" he said, his voice laced with sarcasm. Victoria shrugged off his comment with a dismissive smile, while Simon merely grinned in response. "Victoria is too good for me," he said, and I couldn't help but wonder if my gentle son was struggling in his marriage. Despite their challenges, they had a son, Daniel, our first grandchild. Daniel was undeniably adorable, with his mother's looks and his father's kind heart, a perfect blend of their best traits. I always looked forward to Simon bringing him over, even though Victoria rarely joined us. Perhaps that was for the best. 5 years after Daniel's birth, Emily, our granddaughter, arrived. She was a sweet girl with bright eyes and round cheeks, but when I visited to celebrate her arrival, Victoria shot her a disdainful look. "Daniel is stunning and looks like me. Why is this one so plump and plain? Does she even resemble anyone? She's not cute at all." "Don't say that. You're her mother. She's beautiful just the way she is," I exclaimed. "I can say whatever I want about my own child," Victoria snapped. "Are you trying to start trouble? I won't let a hag like you get away with this." My husband's expression shifted as he overheard, his face ready to support me, but I quickly intervened. The argument escalated, leading to our son losing his temper just as Victoria's parents arrived to join the celebration. "You can only be rude to a certain extent. It's curious that you'd confront me." Victoria shot Simon a fierce glare, her posture tense, as if ready to lash out. I quickly relented. "I'm sorry, Victoria. You've been through a lot since the baby was born. I shouldn't have said that. Please forgive me." "Exactly. You should have thought twice before speaking. Instead of coming all this way, you could have just sent a gift of money." I was at a loss for words. Victoria's rudeness was nothing new. It was incidents like these that caused a rift between us over time. Nevertheless, Simon still made a point to bring Daniel and Emily over regularly, while the sight of our beautiful grandchildren filled us with joy. I couldn't shake off a lingering worry. Daniel was bright and chatty, whereas Emily spoke very little. Even at 3 and 4 years old, her hands were dry and rough, her pale skin taking on a noticeably darker hue from sun exposure. When I asked Victoria about it, she shrugged, saying Emily loved playing in the garden. Still, I couldn't help but feel concerned about our granddaughter's condition. Tragedy struck one day when Simon unexpectedly passed away during a trip. He fell from a pedestrian bridge, and the ambulance was called. They rushed him to the hospital, where he received intensive treatment, but Tragically, he didn't survive. The shock hit me so hard that I could barely stand. Oh, Simon, this can't be happening. It must have hurt so much. Daddy, what's wrong? Dad, wake up. Emily remained silent, biting her lip, while Daniel wept uncontrollably. Meanwhile, Victoria sat nearby, scrolling through her phone without so much as a blink. In hindsight, I realize how odd the scene was, but at that moment, my grief overshadowed everything else. The paramedics found Simon's old, tattered bag beneath the pedestrian bridge and handed it to my husband. It was a bag I had bought him when he started working. He had been such a hard worker, always saving for our family. The weight of it all became almost unbearable. Our son-in-law took charge of organizing the wake and funeral, which went off without a hitch. I was at home, grappling with the reality of our loss. In the store late at night, just after the funeral, the intercom crackled to life. Curious, I glanced at the camera and was startled to see Daniel biting his lip, clearly distressed. I hurried to unlock the door and welcomed him inside. He fought back tears and said in a shaky voice, "Mom told us to leave. Can we please just stay for tonight?" My heart sank as I noticed blood seeping from his bare feet. "Did you two really walk here all by yourselves?" I asked, trying to process the situation. They nodded, but the journey from the nearby town shouldn't have taken long. At 9, Daniel could manage the walk, but Emily, at just 4 years old, must have been terrified in the middle of the night. When I let them into the living room, George had woken up and joined us. I explained Daniel's wish to spend the night. "Please, Grandpa, let's stay until morning," Daniel pleaded. "Absolutely not," George replied, his tone stern. The young boy began to cry, and I was taken aback by the fierce scowl on my husband's face, a mixture of anger and fear. "Can't we at least let them stay for one night?" I urged, but my husband continued to hold back his tears. It struck me then that in all our 30 years of marriage, I had never seen George cry like this, not even during Simon's funeral. "Don't say just for tonight, stay here forever." His words struck a chord in me, and I began to weep uncontrollably, understanding the depth of his sorrow. Later, when I asked the kids what had happened, they shared something shocking. Victoria, despite being a stay-at-home mom, frequently left them alone during the day. Daniel explained how she often yelled at Emily and would push her away for no reason. Whenever Emily cried, Victoria would shout, "Shut up, you're bothering me." Over time, Emily learned to stifle her sobs, feeling guilty for her mother's anger. Daniel often faced her wrath too when he tried to defend his sister. Emily hadn't been allowed to attend kindergarten, so she couldn't escape Victoria's harshness like Daniel could. Instead, she would go outside each day to pull weeds from the garden, hoping that by keeping busy, she might earn a word of praise from her mother. It was clear now why her hands were rough and her skin so deeply sunburned. It seemed Emily was terrified of being scolded, which explained her silence. That evening, Victoria had told them that guests were coming and ordered them to go outside. Daniel managed to put on his shoes, but Emily, caught off guard, was left barefoot. As they made their way to our house in search of safety, Daniel had given his shoes to Emily and took her hand, leading her away from the chaos. "What an incredibly horrible thing to do," I exclaimed, my frustration boiling over. I tried calling my daughter-in-law multiple times, but my efforts were in vain. Since it was late, I decided to spend the night with my grandchildren. However, Daniel woke me early the next morning. "I'm sorry for waking you, Grandma," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily chimed in. "I saw Dad in my dream." Her eyes sparkled with excitement. "He told me to look inside the bag." Daniel's serious expression surprised me, leaving me to wonder if there was more to this dream than they were letting on. I hurriedly told my husband what Daniel had said, urging him out of bed. At first, George was skeptical, still groggy from sleep, but when he saw our son's suitcase, his face turned ashen. No way. This is insane. This is unforgivable. Fueled by anger, we decided to act quickly. We called our eldest daughter, Claire, who lived nearby, and asked her to come watch the grandkids. Meanwhile, George and I rushed to Simon's house, ringing the doorbell repeatedly. After what felt like an eternity, Victoria finally appeared, looking disheveled in her open-collared pajamas. What's the noise? Who the hell is that? I saw a young man with brown hair dart across the room, completely naked. My heart sank as I realized what was happening, but before I could say anything, Victoria's eyes widened in shock, and she slammed the door shut. You barged in here. How dare you? Get out! Victoria shouted from behind the door. We need to talk urgently, I pleaded. Please, just open the door. I can't right now, she snapped, reluctantly. I retrieved the key I found in Simon's backpack and unlocked the door. Just then, the young man bolted out, shouting, "Oh no! Run!" He hastily threw on some clothes and dashed out of the house. Victoria stood in the doorway, glaring at us with no hint of remorse. What are you doing here? Are you really cheating on your husband the day after his death? First of all, stop being ridiculous, I retorted. Look, he's just a guy who fixes gas, she shot back, her voice dripping with disdain. What? So gas repairmen now work without clothes? I couldn't help but mock her. Victoria clicked her tongue in frustration, her beautiful face marred by her bitter demeanor. Simon has left you two behind. You have no right to judge me. Just go. George stepped forward, his face red with anger, determined to confront her about her behavior. With rage boiling inside me, I exclaimed, I can't see the grandkids right now. Where are they? My husband stepped away to check something, pretending to look around the house. For a moment, Victoria seemed at a loss for words, but then she erupted into anger. They went to a friend's house. What's wrong with that? Stop lying. 2 children, aged 4 and 9, disappeared for an entire night, and you didn't worry? Are you even a mother? How can you be so indifferent? Well, how do you know any of this? She shot back defiantly. They walked all the way to our house in the middle of the night. I snapped, and she looked both shocked and confused. Then, brazenly, she replied, my carefully raised son defies me, and our daughter isn't cute at all. Those brats don't need me. You can have them, but I want money. $100,000. Isn't that reasonable? I couldn't believe the audacity of this woman. The thought that someone like her could inflict so much pain on my son and grandchildren filled me with fury. Too bad you can't spend that money in prison. I have a recording of our entire conversation. Well, aren't you just a little too righteous about those kids? I'll be out of here soon enough. It's not just about the kids. You know that taking someone's life is a serious crime, right? There's evidence. Simon's journal was in that bag. He suspected you were having an affair because of your frequent outings. Plus, he hired a detective to look into it. According to the report, you were cheating with that young man, the same one who just ran out of here. It's all in the diary. I feel like my life is in danger. Victoria's tone shifted slightly, but it was still laced with defiance. Simon had all these close calls, almost hit by a car, nearly pushed onto the train tracks. He was ready to divorce me, and he thought I would attack him. That might show your infidelity, but it doesn't prove I murdered Simon. It's just old people gossiping. The cops have bigger fish to fry. Can you still say that after what I just heard? My husband returned, holding a security camera. He discovered it while going through Simon's diary. The camera had been set up in the living room the day before Simon died. When he played the recording, we saw Victoria and the young man talking. I violently pushed your husband down the steps. This time, everything went perfectly. I'm so grateful we'll finally get a hefty life insurance payout. Victoria's lip trembled uncontrollably, and her face turned pale. I was just joking, she stammered, trying to regain her composure. To what extent are you willing to lie? I'll request a reinvestigation from the police and present all the evidence. During the interrogation, your affair partner might reveal everything about you. And by the way, Claire mentioned that the pedestrian bridge where Simon fell is heavily trafficked. Many modern cars are equipped with cameras. I'm sorry, Victoria blurted out, panic flashing in her eyes. That guy intimidated me. If you let this go, I'll give you half of the $100,000 life insurance payout. Excuse me? That's not yours. You can't do that. We made each other beneficiaries when we got married. I reminded her that Simon had named Daniel as the beneficiary instead of her in his journal. No matter their ages, Simon's trust structure allowed his children to inherit the benefits when they reached a certain age. That's absurd. It's all part of a scheme to get a large sum of money, she protested, her voice rising in desperation. She crumpled to the ground, sobbing and wailing like a child. We stood there, watching her in uneasy silence. Eventually, both she and her partner were taken into custody. Taking someone's life is a heinous crime, and it's unlikely the perpetrator will remain free for long. Even if they were released from prison, who would want anything to do with them? Now, my grandchildren live with me. My daughter and her husband have moved in as well, helping us care for the kids and raising them as if they were their own. Emily, who once barely spoke, is gradually starting to open up and express herself more. I'm determined to see these children thrive and find happiness, no matter what it takes.